on phonics, and so I learned to speak phonetically with flashcards as early as humanly possible. And so I have a very solid memory of what it was like to learn English, and therefore I compare other ways of learning languages to the way I learned it then. So I try to do the same thing. So like for Hebrew, like watching children's cartoons in Hebrew, or like going through old, kind of letting it build naturally instead of trying to formally force it into my brain. Because once you start giving me rules, I lose track. But if you just, it's like if you were to
good, it's better.
Easier for me to memorize music.
And the last time I didn't have, today I have some things I could share more easily if it was online, but we're meeting next Monday, yes.
But classrooms don't work well for me generally. Unless it's something like this, where we're just going over our timeline.
Good, good, yeah. We're meeting Monday, we're not meeting, the Wednesday classes are meeting, but Monday, yeah. And I think, who's teaching? I'm not teaching next Monday, I think it's, oh, it's on here. It's gonna be Cantor, Braun next week.
Yeah.
She's doing holidays. I can look on my, I have my list here.
Well,
she's going to be doing
international phonetic alphabet.
Sukkot, Passover, and Shavuot.
I was really highly recommend
it. You don't need to look this up. But next time, yes. So no, there's no. I'm going to run to the ladies' room. Can somebody keep an eye if anyone comes to them?
Lots of beginners textbooks and right back in sometimes. It is a little different for language, but did you ever see My Fair Lady? Yeah. It's the same as that, where he's like telling her about different tongue positions and facial things, like it's micro movements. And there's in class actually, we have to go to our music library, and they have these old slides that were x-rays of the tongue moving inside of the mouth, and they would have us go and study those in between when we learned different vowel shapes, and then we'd have to go and watch the videos in the library lab, but they were old. So
well, you know, that's interesting because I think of and one of my fantasies is that I'm teaching French people how to say the, because they always want to say the. And I think you have to have your tongue in between your teeth.
For sure.
You know, you have to. And if you don't have your tongue between your teeth, you're not going to pass my class. I at least want to know that you have your tongue between your teeth. At least try that hard. Because the doesn't have your tongue between your teeth. Right. So it's that, you know, and I'm aware of that for the. Maybe I'm not so aware of it for other things, but that I'm very aware of. This. You vibrate your tongue between your teeth. Right. And so I can understand if vibration would be hard, but the tongue between your teeth.
Well, you know what, you might do, because you seem to get really into this. Eastman would probably let you audit a 101 IPA class. I would talk to them and see, because when I was in school, we had people do that all the time. Yeah.
Why do that?
So every first year music school has to do international.
Because they speak for all the different languages that they speak.
Right. So like for freshmen, you have to be able to sing in 5 different languages, which is, you can pick which one. Usually it's Spanish, French, Italian, German, and English.
Russian.
Sometimes Russian. You can choose Russian, but in order to pass your level A, like vocal, it's like a recital you do for 3 professors. But to pass that, you need to sing in that many languages. So you'll actually take that IPA class for English first, and a lot of people will take specialized classes for all those languages as well. And so when our professors are working with us to sing something, they'll have us actually go through the whole song, rewrite the entire thing in IPA, and a lot of times we'll discuss and argue kind of which sound we think it should be, and for different periods of time, let's say old French music versus new French music, there might be a different sound that was more appropriate for that particular things. Or if you're singing with a harpsichord, you're singing something Bach versus something contemporary, your might be totally different.
And I spoke with the guy who's the French language coach. His name is very but he was telling me like, because I was asking him, so what's the difference in French saying certain language, certain words. He was saying one thing, one thing is like, I sing is je chante. But if you sing, it's je chante. Right. Because you have to, that's the way it is to, you know. I remember that.
And that's one of the bigger things is learning the differences between all the different vowels, because consonants are pretty easy.
I
But
didn't
especially
bring
like in
any of
Spanish
the
or French or
books
T,
with
if you're more of a
me
D,
today.
you're more of a or more of a oo, or it
I
depends.
gave
So
the extra ones that I
especially
had,
important to
I
have
gave
for us,
to Cantor, and
in between words, if you're
so
saying
I don't know where they
in order to launch into the next phrase.
I might have my, I might have mine.
Oh, it's really crazy. It's really fast.
Like, she and I would talk about this kind of stuff all the time.
I keep mine.
She and I used to pass notes to each other in IPA when we were in school.
I might in my
So,
classroom.
when you've got that, and you're singing.
Let me run down, and I might have one in there, and then
And it's all, I always said, like,
Okay.
everything. You know,
I don't,
like a zip file
we
on
have
the
them in the
computer.
temple office too.
I have to, when I
and-
learn a new song, I'm writing each note perfectly. So if I need a note, I need
Thank you.
the vowel, I need the, where it's gonna go, and it's like, I can press it in my brain into one little piece of information. And then I have a visual, like when I sing music, I read it in my brain. So when I memorize things.
Well, next week, Cantor's teaching the social
So
one.
when I play trombone, if I have a folk piece of music, I close my eyes and I read off of it. So that's why
Yeah, I'll
yeah,
tell
when
you.
I'm writing. into it,
Yeah,
it really helps.
I mean, I'll remind everyone, and
Well,
I'll see what she's teaching, and we'll go from there.
It's been a while since I've used it.
That's why
We'll wait one more minute, because it's
Do
7:14.
it in IPA at the same time.
Yeah.
Usually, well, another thing they do is they would use one music piece a week before for actual performance, and we had to learn the entire thing. And they gave me this awful French piece.
It's like, it is hard to. Just a packages.
So 1 hour to tell us all Jewish history. Go.
All right, we'll get started, because, but first, next week Cantor's teaching, and she is doing, I've got my list. She is going to be teaching about Sukkot, Passover, and Shavuot. So she'll want you to read the chapters on those, for those. Welcome. How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. And yeah, lots to do tonight. But I think we'll go ahead and go back and introduce ourselves, because we have someone new, which is fabulous. But we had someone new in Hebrew as well. And this time, we'll introduce ourselves in English though, in this class, and that class we have to do it in Hebrew. So I'm Pauline, welcome.
I'm Leslie.
Jeff,
Mason. Quinn.
Rin,
Nancy. Stacy.
Frank,
Johanna.
Jeff,
Ellen.
and Richard.
This will be all. Tonight is history. We're gonna hit some highlights. It's gonna be impossible. According to the original schedule, we were supposed to go from the beginning up through the Enlightenment. My vision is that there's no way we can even get through the expulsion from Spain, but we're gonna try and do that. So I can put it up here, and we'll have to, I guess I should share it so that we see if anybody comes. It would be much easier if I could just share everything. Where this is the one. This is what I sent home, this timeline. So if we see if anybody wants to come in, just let me know, because I won't really be looking. Kind of a crazy timeline. I found it online. It's impossible to put a timeline of Jewish history in one page, but they did, and they hit some stuff. I didn't print it out, but I sent it home, and I'll send it home again. But I did type up, in trying to figure out what I was gonna say in an hour. And this time, usually we'll do some readings and some discussion. We're not gonna have as much of that today, though we'll have some stories, because stories are good. But to try and hit history in an hour, and not have you bored to tears is gonna be hard. So this doesn't cover, I mean, I'm missing a lot of things on these highlights. And these are just highlights of things that I might want to talk about more than somebody else might choose different highlights. Some things we'll go through more quickly than others, and if we get, if something's of interest, then we can spend more time on something. The very last class is also history. It's called modernity on here, but we can just fill in with some other history in that. Do you want me to leave this up, or does that help? Okay. Yeah. Doesn't hurt. Okay, we'll just have to see if anybody comes to the waiting room. Okay. So our first part of history that we're going to talk about is not necessarily history per se, but it's part of Jewish history. And that's when we talk about the biblical period. Because history, we think that there's some documentation, there's something that we can look up. And in the biblical period, we have the Torah, but the Torah is not a history book. The Torah is not really telling us that this actually happened. Maybe it did, maybe it didn't. But it is what shaped us as a Jewish people. So we have to look at the Torah, and we have to look at the stories that are there. We could spend a whole year talking about the Torah, but we're going to really just, again, hitting highlights. So we start in the book of Genesis, which is where we are in our Torah reading cycle. We're in the middle of the story of our ancestors, the patriarchs and the matriarchs. So we have Abraham. Abraham was in 3 portions of Torah. We're already finished with the piece of Abraham when we look at our weekly Torah cycle. And we're in the middle of the story of Isaac. This coming week in this Torah portion, Jacob and his twin brother Esau are born. Actually, Esau first, Jacob is the younger, but they are born. And then we go on from there with our so Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob I thought of as our patriarchs, and the matriarchs, there's 4. There are Sarah, Rebecca, Leah, and Rachel. Lots of really interesting things we could get into, but there's stuff that you might not know that I would rather kind of get to. When we look through Torah, we then come, after all of these stories of all of these people, we get into Egypt. We have slavery. We have Moses, baby Moses being born. We have Moses growing up. We have the Exodus and the wanderings. And in that time, we receive the Torah and all the laws. And this is the piece that we read again every year. So I don't think we need to spend as much time on this. We have the period when they enter the land. We have Judges. Again, great, interesting stories, some interesting characters we might want to look at. We're skipping over that. And we get to the Kings. We have, and the Kings and the prophets kind of go at the same time, but we could talk about them separately. So much we could really spend there. Again, there's stuff that you might not know that I would rather get to. But also when we start talking about the Kings, when we get to this historical First Temple period, we find history. And this is the first time that we find bits of history, we find archaeological evidence of a Jewish people in this First Temple period, not just in Jerusalem, but elsewhere. And that makes it kind of fun and kind of interesting, in fact. And I brought many books and many things today. This is just because it's kind of fun. Just outside the walls of the old city of Jerusalem, it's a Scottish church called St. Andrew's Church. And in the parking lot, we find, because they were, in Israel, anytime you want to do anything, they have to have an archaeological survey. They actually do that here as well. My son is an archaeologist. I could tell you all about that, but Sam. But in Israel, every single rock in the whole country tells a story. And in the parking lot of St. Andrew's Church, they found a burial site from the First Temple period. So you need to bury outside the walls of the city. One of the first things that would be done when you're settling a city is you're going to build a place to bury your dead. And the dead are not buried inside the walls of the city. So we find this really interesting, it's called Ketef Chinom, which means like the shoulder of the Chinom or the Chinom Valley. And they found some really cool things there. There's the church right there in the parking lot. They just started to find it. But it's interesting because it teaches you, see if I can, I just grabbed this out of today, so I didn't find the right page. But how people took care of their dead and how people were buried tells you a lot about the culture, the civilization. Again, my son could tell you a lot more because he's the archaeologist.
Out of curiosity, was
Yep.
it anybody significant? Like, was this finding?
There was a significant piece in this find, but not a person. No, they were just people buried there. But what happened in this period is that people were actually buried generally in caves. And in stone, you put a body there just wrapped in a shroud, and you go back a year later and you collect the bones and put the bones in what's called an ossuary, and you keep those bones collected somewhere. And then somebody else is going to lie in that. So the interesting thing here, I do have a session if I could draw it, but I can. So they find like these almost like trenches in the stone, kind of like that, so that you could put the head and bury a body. And I think, I haven't looked in the book in years, but I think if I remember correctly, they're like that across. And it's just really kind of fascinating. Yeah. But I brought the book because this is a piece of, it's late First Temple period, but from the First Temple period, we find lots of archaeology and lots of stones. And some of the stones have names that you could find in the Torah.
When was the First Temple period?
About like 900 BCE. Okay. So on here, it tells us, yeah, from like 1,000 to like maybe, well, the temple was destroyed 586. So like 1,900 or so BCE to 586 BCE. First temple destroyed. Oh, I didn't put that date. I'm sorry. First temple was destroyed in 586 BCE.
You did.
I did. Thank you. Oh, there it is. Destruction. Thank you. So David. So there are 12 tribes. So we're backing up a little bit, and it's going to kind of go all over the place. 12 tribes based on the 12 sons of Jacob. We have 12 tribes. When the Israelites entered the land after Moses during the time of the Judges, the tribes were not unified. And what we find in the book of Judges, which is really interesting, is that there's kind of a time of chaos, and then a judge comes and saves the day, and for a while, and then there's more times of chaos and fighting. So they wanted a king because they thought that it could help. So the first king is Saul, and the tribes were not unified under Saul. Really interesting story with David, King David, so many fascinating stories, but again, easy enough to find all that stuff. But under King David, came after Saul, this was the first time the tribes were unified. David moved his capital, or made his capital, his city, Jerusalem. It was the first time. Jerusalem had never been in Israelite hands. David, this warrior king, attacked the city and got a new place. Just like Washington, D.C. was the capital of the 13 colonies as a neutral place, and they took land from Maryland and Virginia and made a new city to be neutral. This was a really good political move on David's part to have a neutral capital city. It had never been in Israelite hands because the tribes were not really unified, and he was trying really hard to do that. So under David and his son Solomon, again, really interesting things with them, really great stories. But under them, the tribes were unified as one whole. Solomon's the one who built the temple. David wasn't allowed to build the temple because he was a warrior and he had blood on his hands. It was up to his son Solomon, who was a peacemaker and a wise king, he built the temple. When Solomon died, we have a split, and we have what we call the divided kingdom. So there were 10 tribes in the north and 2 tribes in the south. So the tribes of Judah and Benjamin in the south, and that's where Jerusalem was in the south. And then the other 10 tribes in the north, and they made their capital in the city of Shechem, north there. Fighting and interesting things and interesting stories that are a little different from each of those 2 kingdoms. Some people think this is why one of the possible reasons that we have 2 different stories, creation stories and 2 Noah stories in our Torah, because the stories were passed down in each of the kingdoms and then they were redacted and put together. If that's true, we don't know, but that's one belief. So interesting stories of both of those kingdoms, and we can read in the book of Kings, you have both stories of both kingdoms. And the prophets, most of the prophets were from the kingdom of Judah in the south. And so those, the 2 tribes in Jerusalem, the kingdom of Judah, kingdom of Israel in the north. So Amos, I believe, is the only one of the prophets who actually came from there. Others went there to prophesy. The Assyrians came in 722. I don't know if I put the year on there. 722, I think the Assyrians came and they took over this whole kingdom of Israel. So there was no more kingdom of Israel. Assyria came. And what they did, the Assyrians, when they came, they took all the people that were there and displaced them, moved them out somewhere else and brought in their own people. So this is why we call them the 10 lost tribes, because we don't know where any of these people went when the Assyrians came and kicked them out. So they're gone. So we still then had the tribes of Judah and Benjamin in the south with Jerusalem. And interesting stories of fighting. And this is a fun book. If we wanted to look at them all, this is my Bible atlas that goes through and tells you all of the different, like in maps and in pictures, all of these things. It's kind of fun. 586. So the Assyrians had conquered the land of the kingdom of Israel. They were on their way to conquer the kingdom of Judah. They were really close, and then something happened and they went back home. They don't know if it was a plague at home or whatever brought them back home. And then Babylonians came, and in 586 BCE, the Babylonians destroyed the temple in Jerusalem, and there was the Babylonian exile. 50 years later, the Persians come and they take over Babylon. And the Persians say to the Jews who were there, you can go back, you can go build a temple. Not everyone went. We find already here, there are some Jews who stayed in Babylon, some who went to Persia. Some even with the Babylonian exile, some were sent to Egypt. The poorer people were not even exiled to Babylon, they were sent to Egypt. But we already have some that are there, and not everyone came back when the Persians said you can build another temple. So 50 years later, we could go back to Jerusalem, and it took a little while, but the second temple was built. We have here stories with Nehemiah, who was a priest, and he was built like the walls of this new city, and Ezra the scribe. Ezra the scribe becomes really important because there are those who believe he's the one who redacted our Torah. There are others who think it was someone else, but there are many who believe that it was Ezra who put the whole Torah together. We had all these different pieces and put it all together. So we have the start of our second temple, and it wasn't a great glorious temple at this time, but there was a second temple built. 332 BCE, we have this guy Alex that you've probably heard of because he was really great. And he came and he conquered most of the world, known or unknown. And he came to Jerusalem and he didn't have to fight. He just went and they said, let us pray to our God. Let us do our own thing and you can come and we'll pay you taxes. So the Greeks came right in. They didn't have to conquer Jerusalem. And all was well at first. Alexander dies and his kingdom is split up. And this small territory that is Judea, that's what they were calling it then, Judea, was kind of split between the Ptolemies in the south and the Seleucids in the north. So after Alexander died, the Ptolemies were ruling for a while and things were okay. And then the Seleucids came and conquered them and they came. And when the Seleucids first came, things were okay. Until we get to a guy, again, I have to do this really quickly because we've got a lot of history to cover. Till we get to a guy, Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus the Fourth, Antiochus Epiphanes. Epiphanes meaning he's God manifest. He is so great. And you've probably heard about him, but you didn't even really know his name or you didn't know it. Because now we come to the story of Hanukkah. And Antiochus is the one who wanted everyone to bow down to him. And he was the one that they need to, think is so important. And we have this small group that fights back. But if we back up a little bit, we also see that there had been a lot of Greek influence. We have our temple in Jerusalem. We have Greek influence. So if we look at our world today, we see Jews who are very pious, and we see Jews who are more assimilated into the culture, like us. That doesn't mean we don't take our Judaism any less seriously, or we're not less religious, as people say. But there are those who are more pious. And so at the time when the Greeks were in power, we had those who liked things Greek and those who did not. The Hellenizers, who liked things Greek, and the Hasidim, who did not. And within those groups, I'm sure you had a wide range of people as well. But the Hellenizers were much more assimilated. And it was the Hasidim who fought back against Antiochus. And we have this man named Mattathias. He was from a town called Modi'in, which many of us have heard of today, but he was from Modi'in, and he had 5 sons. And he started this big rebellion that we call the Maccabean Revolt. His son Judah was known as the Maccabee. Maccabee means hammer, so he was known as the hammer. And all 5 of these sons, very interesting stories with all of them, but Judah led this fight. It lasted for many, many years. 165 BCE, it started in 167. In 165 BCE, the temple was retaken by the Maccabees and their followers. The rest of the territory, there was a lot more territory that was still in Greek hands, in the Seleucids, the Assyrian Greeks. And it took like another 20 years before all of this territory was in the hands of this now Hasmonean dynasty. Really interesting period of our history, the Hasmonean dynasty. This is a really good book that as you see, it's all falling apart. That it starts with the Hellenistic period and goes beyond, but it's a really interesting book. And this, I have others as well. I don't want to go into all of the details of the interesting Hasmonean rulers. They're all in here. Some were not so nice. Some were very nice. Lots of infighting and lots of fighting for territory to expand their world. They came up with this policy, which today we think would never happen. But as they were expanding their territory and they conquered another people, they gave them the choice of convert or die, which we find later and we say, no, we're not going to convert. But it happened in our own history. And one of the people who's actually, I think it was his grandfather who then converted, this Idumean people in the area of the Negev desert today. We find, jumping ahead, Herod the Great. So he married one of the granddaughters of the Hasmonean rulers, and he himself became this puppet ruler, really. And he thought of himself as great. So many interesting stories also in this book and in this book of Herod, that if we had weeks to do this, then we could just hear all kinds of interesting stories about him. In my past life, when I was a tour guide in Israel, I used to take people up to Masada and we would stand there and talk about these stories of Herod. Herod built Masada. He was a great builder. He rebuilt the whole second temple. Oh no, I only have this. This is another kind of fun one. It's got drawings of what people thought that the temple looked like, and that some of these others look like. Where's the temple? No, this is on Masada. We have but he built the city. If you've been to Israel, you've been to Caesarea or to Caesarea. He built this port. There was no port there. So he created a port and it became a beautiful city. He created, there's the temple. He remade the whole temple. So what we think of today as the Western Wall, the Kotel, it was a retaining wall of Herod's temple. So this piece right here is where we would find the Western Wall today. And it's a retaining wall. The temple was built at the top there. It's a slope. It's a big hill. And you can see that the wall is only this big here, and down here it's huge because it's a slope, and he flattened the top out. Herod was a great builder. He was not a nice person. Killed anybody he ever loved. He had 10 wives. He loved his second wife. Miriam was his love of his life. She was probably scared of him, but he loved her, and then he didn't trust her and killed her. But that's not for tonight. Those are, again, you can read those. They're wonderful stories. The Romans were coming. So actually, even before Herod, just before Herod, there was kind of a civil war between the two youngest Hasmonean leaders. They had been the grandchildren of the first leaders, and kind of a civil war. And one of them wanted to ally himself with Rome, and the other with I want to say the Parthians, but a group that is no longer. So Rome came, and in 67 BCE, Rome came, and then Herod became the vassal king of Rome. When Herod died, his children kind of took over, and some of them were worse than he was. The Herod that's mentioned in the New Testament is actually one of Herod's children, not Herod, but he was one of the children, and he was worse than Herod, but that's, we get to the story then also of the beginnings and the origins of Christianity at this time. Jesus lived in the time of the Second Temple. Lots of interesting learning the history of each of these of the new religion and this other, there were a lot of sects at the time. So coming in as this new Christianity, there were a lot of new little things, and that's the one that stuck. If we were to really examine what Judaism looked like in this period, which is also fascinating, we have the Pharisees, we have the Sadducees, we have Essenes, we have Zealots, we have all of these different little sects. The Pharisees and the Sadducees were the two biggest groups, and they were kind of clashing with each other a little bit. The Sadducees were the more elite, the more aristocratic. But interestingly, they did not want to debate Torah. They did not want to try to interpret Torah at all. They liked to Torah as it was. And they also were more willing to bring in some Roman culture. The Pharisees were what we think of when we think of the rabbis that debated Torah at the time. These like if we think of the days of Rabbi Hillel, Rabbi Shammai, which we will talk about actually now, it's just there's just too much. They were the Pharisees. They were the more common people. They were the ones that wanted to understand Torah, interpret Torah. So what happens when the temple is destroyed by the Romans in the year 70 CE? What happens to Judaism? Well, for the Sadducees, with no more Torah and no more temple worship, because if you are only going by what the Torah says and there's no temple and there's nothing you can do to sacrifice, you can't continue. So we need these rabbis and the Pharisees to continue, for Judaism to continue who we are. So we come to a story, because I promised stories. Great Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. He was one of the great rabbis at the time, many great rabbis at this time. And actually we will go back and talk about Hillel when we talk about the Talmud. But Rabbi Yochanan Zakkai was also one who could see the writing on the wall. This revolt against Rome lasted for several years. And he saw that there was not a chance that the temple would survive, that Judaism would survive as it is. He's like, we have to find a way for Judaism to survive and to continue. What are they going to do? Well, he and two of his disciples go to his nephew, who was actually one of the zealots fighting against the Romans, and said, you need to help us. We need to make a plan, because I need to get out of the city. The city of Jerusalem there was a siege around you. You can't just walk out of the city. You can't leave the walls. Couldn't leave the walls unless you were dead, because you bury your dead outside the walls of a city. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, his nephew and his two disciples come up with this plan. You're going to act sick. We're going to tell everyone that you're dying. The great Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he dies, we have to bury him outside the walls of the city. So he was looking weaker and weaker, and people were coming and they saw that he was dying. To get him out of the city, who's going to believe you're carrying the great rabbi? We don't know. So one thing they did was they took some very smelly, rotting meat, because it's very hot in Jerusalem and bodies decay quickly. You need to bury your dead right away. So they're going to wrap him up in a shroud, put some stinky meat so that it smells like he's decomposing. And you go, and you can, this story is in the Talmud. You could find it in the Talmud and read this story. He goes, they go to the gate, and there's these zealots, those who were fighting against Rome, saying, no, you can't walk out of Jerusalem. What are you doing? We have to take our rabbi. Well, we don't believe you. We don't know that he's here. This is the great Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Well, we're going to stab him to make sure. We don't know that you have somebody. How do we know he's not hiding in there? And like, you want to take the responsibility for stabbing the great Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai? They didn't, in the end, they left. They walked out of the city with this body. He left and he went to the Roman camp. He went to the Roman general, whose name was Vespasian. And he said to Vespasian, he treated him and spoke to him as though he's the emperor. And Vespasian stops him and says, how dare you say that? You know, you could be killed for that. And they put him aside. He said, why did you say that? And why are you here? Why did you escape? And he's explaining to the general that he wants to continue with Judaism. And then all of a sudden he stopped and a messenger comes, a messenger from Rome. The emperor has died and Vespasian has been named emperor. And he looks at Yochanan ben Zakkai and says, wow, you knew this? I'll give you anything you want. And he says, give me the town of Yavne by the sea. And let me bring all of the Jewish court. And let me transfer the Jewish court and the rabbis and the study house to this town. And this is how we have the movement of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish court, and the rabbis who were debating all of this moved to Yavne. And this is how they could continue what became the Mishnah and became the Talmud. And if it weren't for Rabbi Yochanan and Zakkai, we might not be here. Yeah, it's all in the Talmud. So the center of the Sanhedrin moved from Jerusalem to Yavne, and then it traveled all over the Galilee in different places, became the center. And they had the great assembly. They had the great what they were calling, what they would come and discuss. So what they were doing from about 200 BCE till 200 CE, so this is about 400-year period, the rabbis would debate everything and they would memorize it, and it was what we call this oral law. They would try to understand and interpret Torah, and they would say, this one said that, and this one said that, and it got to be so much that it needed to be written down. So around 200 CE, we have Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, Judah the Prince. He was a descendant of Hillel, and he is the one who first wrote the first part of the Talmud, which is what we call the Mishnah. And so backing up to Hillel, we've heard of Hillel. We have Hillel on campuses and Hillel all over the place. Hillel, the great rabbi, lived in the 1st century BCE, I believe. And he and Rabbi Shammai at the same time were the ones that there are so many debates that we hear about, Hillel and Shammai, Shammai and Hillel. We tend to follow the rules of Hillel now, the ways of Hillel, because he was more, yes.
Sorry, you're saying Talmud and Torah, are they interchangeable?
No, it's a great question. So Torah, we know, is our scroll, followed by these other writings. The Tanakh becomes the Hebrew Bible. The Torah, the writing, the prophets and the writings. The Talmud is this written down oral law. It's basically the oral law written down, but it's in 2 pieces. The first piece of it is called the Mishnah. The second part is called the Gemara. Together they are there, and they written down 200 CE and then 500 CE. It's really, there's a lot. There is a lot. But one thing that becomes important is that in this writing down of this, you write down even the debates of those who do not win the debate, like Hillel and Shammai. This is why it becomes important, because all of Shammai's rulings and his thoughts are there for us to learn and remember. Because even though we follow the rules of Hillel, Shammai was important too. And we don't forget that. we don't want to wash out the history of it because it's important to know what the debate was and who they were. Any other questions? Just to keep track of our time. There's a lot more we could go through with, and a lot of really great stories. The Talmud is full of really wonderful stories. It's also full of lots of really boring laws and debates and trying to understand this and that. But the stories are fun. And the stories, I have not actually sat and studied Talmud, but I know many of the stories that are in there because that's easier for me. Okay. So then there's actually, like, we get to the Talmud, backing up, we forgot Masada. So the temple is destroyed in 70 CE. When the temple is destroyed, there are still 3 strongholds in Jewish hands, 3 fortresses along the path. One is being Masada. And Masada stayed in Jewish hands for 3 more years until 73 CE. And then we have this fascinating story of these rebels on this Masada. And it's just this plateau in the middle of the desert. And the ruins are there. The ruins are amazing. And you can see there were 8 Roman army camps around the base. Lots of some interesting things. Okay, again, moving on because we don't have time to go into details. And the Bar Kokhba rebellion, that's why I had to write things down because I'll forget. The Bar Kokhba rebellion, 132 to 135 CE. They fought back against Rome and actually took control of Jerusalem for 3 years under Bar Kokhba. And then when the Romans retook Jerusalem in 135, that's when they said that Jews couldn't live in Jerusalem anymore. And everything was forbidden because they didn't want, and they changed the name to Aelia Capitolina and made it a true Roman city because they didn't want any more rebellion. We have the what we call the Jerusalem Talmud, and we have the Babylonian Talmud because centers of study and learning were moving farther out. There was still in the Galilee, there was still areas of study and schools so not in Jerusalem itself, but in the Galilee. And then in Babylonia, there were more academies. So they were about the same time, and many of the things are the same, but there are some differences between the Talmud that was written about a little earlier, probably in the about the 4th century, and in the Jerusalem Talmud, and then about 500 CE, a little bit later, the Babylonian Talmud was written. Most of when we say Talmud, we think of the Babylonian Talmud in most cases. Okay. So let's look at some key figures in jumping into Europe in the Middle Ages. How did Jews get to Europe, or when did they go? With the destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem in 70 CE, the Romans were in charge. The Romans were all over the place. So Jews were dispersed and they settled all over the Roman world. It puts Jews in France and in Spain and all over areas that were controlled by Rome at the time. And many Jews stayed in the Middle East area. There are some areas within Israel today that have there's one little city called Pikain that's always had Jewish residents from ancient times. It's kind of interesting, this one little town, but other places as well. Big community in Persia, big community in Egypt, big community all over the areas of the Middle East, and then in Europe. So we're going to jump way ahead, and we're going to talk about Rashi, because some of these names that you may have heard and that come up, and Rashi is one. He's one of the big names in trying to understand Torah and Torah interpretation, and people look to Rashi. And if you look at a page of Talmud, which is kind of hard to read, but there is today, if you look at a page of Talmud, there is Rashi's explanation around and on there as well. So Rashi stands for Rabbi Shlomo Yitzchaki, and he was born in France in the 11th century in 1040. He went to Worms, Germany, to study, and then he came back to France. He was a rabbi, but being a rabbi in olden days was not your profession. It was what you did on the side. So he was actually a winemaker, Rashi. And his whole family, they all made wine, kind of interesting. In France, it makes sense. But he was a winemaker, and he was a great Torah scholar and an interpreter. And he tried to explain things in a more simplified way. On the surface, though, if you look deeper, his explanations are on a deeper level. When you read Torah, you never look at the simple explanation. In fact, when you read Torah, we have like 4 different levels of understanding and reading Torah. So we think of it like an orchard. The word in Hebrew, the word pardes, means orchard. And that helps us understand Torah. So that the pay, the first one is for, this isn't on here, this is just on an aside completely. The Peshat means simple. So the simple level is what happens when we just read Torah and we say, oh, that's a nice story. We read it. But we can't really understand it that way. So when we read Torah, we have to think of it as like, almost like digging deep. So think of it almost like a little crime scene. So the first thing you would do is you would stand there and you wouldn't touch anything, but you would look. And this is your simple level and your simple interpretation of Torah. And then if you're at a crime scene, the next thing you want to do is start looking for clues and asking questions. This is our second level of studying Torah. So pardes, the resh there, stands for remez, which means clue. So we're looking for clues, and when we start reading Torah, we start finding repetition. We start finding things that make us ask questions and wanting to know more. And so this is our second level of reading Torah. Then the next thing is we have to put an interpretation. So if we're at a crime scene, well, we want to figure out what happened and we want an answer. So this is our drush, pardes. This is our dalit, our drush. This is our explanation. This is what happens when at a bar bat mitzvah, the student explains the Torah portion, or the rabbi gives a sermon and explains the Torah portion, or we look at Rashi and we explain the Torah portion. This is our drush. So we find our own explanation. And the last level, which we don't always get to, the pardes, this is the samech, means sod, and it's a secret. Not so much that there are secrets within Torah, but it's when you're reading Torah and suddenly it becomes clear. It's like this aha moment. Now I understand what this is here and how it connects to me and what it really means to me. That's the sod, when you find it. And you don't always find it with every reading of Torah. So I got back because of Rashi. So some of Rashi's explanations helped you on this simple level, but some of them are much deeper. And many times when we look at Torah commentary, it's not going to be on the simple level, but Rashi helped to explain a lot of that. I gave you some years that I'm not going to go into about when Jews going into England and getting expelled from England, but I thought that was interesting because before the expulsion from Spain, Jews were expelled elsewhere. Black Death was blamed on Jews, which isn't a surprise. But I want to talk about Spain. All of 15 minutes I get for Spain. The golden age of Spain. This was a time when our culture flourished. In Spain, under the Muslim rulers who came from North Africa, they were Moors, they were Berbers, they came into Spain. It was the golden age of Spain for Spain, but it was the golden age of Spain for Judaism. the Muslim rulers allowed Jews and Christians to practice their religion, and they were still thought of as second-class citizens. They were still not full. They had a dhimmi status, but they were free to practice Judaism. And one of the most beautiful things that we see, and we can understand quickly why we're free here, is because we find poetry. If we think back, there's biblical poetry. But in all of our history elsewhere, there was so much going on. When did you have time to sit and be free and let your culture grow? And poetry was very important to the Muslim rulers of Spain as well. But we find poetry in Hebrew, written, beautiful poetry. So I printed out a few poems. So these poems are all by Yehuda Hanassi. I'm sorry, they wrote the Talmud. Judah Halevi, Yehuda Halevi. I'm getting all my, it's getting to bedtime. Yehuda Halevi, who lived in Spain 1075 to 1141, the greatest of all the Spanish poets. And I'm going to email you, I found, actually I can show you here, a whole book that I found in PDF form. So I'm going to send this whole book to you, but I printed out a few poems because it gives such a beautiful picture of a time when the culture was free. So scholarship flourished. Before we read these, because I would like to sit and read some of these, another story, because stories are good. So even before Yehuda Halevi, we find another great name from this period, Shmuel Hanagid, Samuel ibn Nagrela, Shmuel Hanagid. He was the advisor to the Muslim ruler. He was the vizier, the number 2 guy. This also tells you this is a time when not only could Jewish culture flourish, but this was so unusual that Jews could have such important positions of power. So many people knew so many languages. So they spoke Hebrew. They didn't speak Hebrew. They knew Hebrew. They spoke Arabic. They knew Spanish. They were able to be translators, scientists, so many things. Yehuda Halevi was a doctor. So Shmuel Hanagid, first a story with Shmuel Hanagid. So Shmuel Hanagid was also a poet. He was the advisor to the Muslim ruler. And not surprisingly, there was another Muslim poet who was jealous of Shmuel Hanagid. Not only is he a better poet, but he's the advisor to the caliph. Well, so this guy wanted to get back at him, and he said, you know, that poem that he wrote, he didn't write it, I wrote it. That's my poem. He stole it from me. I think you should cut out his tongue because he's speaking wise. Well, there's this whole thing. They go to the caliph, and the caliph says, or the ruler says, how do we know? And so Shmuel Hanagid said, well, here, I have my first draft. I have all my markings, all my changes until I got to this final form. Here they are. They turn to the poet who's accusing Shmuel Hanagid. Where's your draft? Where's all of your things? And he didn't have it. Well, he wanted to cut out Shmuel Hanagid's tongue. So now the ruler says to Shmuel Hanagid, okay, you can, have his tongue cut out because he was telling lies. A few weeks later, they're sitting in the palace, and the ruler walks by, and he hears laughing. And then there's people playing chess, and they're laughing. And he goes in, and it's these 2 men. It's Shmuel Hanagid and the man who was accusing him. And he said, I thought you were I told you could cut out his tongue. And Shmuel Hanagid, very wise, said, I did. I cut out his evil tongue and replaced it with a kind one. So, just tells us what a wonderful time in our history. So we have, I don't know if we'll have time for them. I think I might have to send these to you, but I have some poems here really quickly. So Maimonides, there's two more rabbis we need to mention who are important, and then we'll read poetry. How's that? Okay, so Maimonides, you may have heard of Maimonides. He's also known as the Rambam, Rabbi Moses ben Maimon. Rambam, we take the first letter of each of those, and we get Maimonides, which is just the son, Moses, son of Maimon. He was born in Spain, and he was born in a time when there was not quite as peaceful as when Shmuel Hanaki was there. So there was a little bit of concern that they would be killed. So his family, when he was a young man, moved from Spain. They went first to North Africa, then they went to Egypt, then they went to Israel, Palestine, and back to Egypt. And Maimonides was a physician. He actually became the court physician to the Sultan in Cairo, and he was a great rabbi. And he wrote prolifically, and people wrote to him asking for his advice and his answers to so many questions. He's best known for two works, for the Mishneh Torah and the Guide for the Perplexed. He wrote the Guide for the Perplexed in Judeo-Arabic so that anyone could read it, even if those who were not knowledgeable of Hebrew, and he wrote the Mishneh Torah in Hebrew for those who are a little more scholarly. And it was his interpretation of the Mishnah to try and make the Mishnah easier to understand. He's known for so many things. He was a philosopher as well. He's known for his ladder of tzedakah, so that all tzedakah is good, all giving, we're obliged. Tzedakah is not charity. It translates as righteousness. It's an obligation that we have. Charity comes from the Greek, which means heart, that you give because it makes you feel good. Tzedakah we do because it's the right thing to do. We're obligated. But there are levels of tzedakah. And he made a ladder showing in the highest level is when you help someone to help themselves. You teach them a trade, or you teach them some way to be self-sufficient. But it starts there at the bottom. In the middle, it's when you give anonymously. I didn't print out the ladder for you, but it's easy to find. Not long after, or really not long after, we find back in Spain, we find another great rabbi. He's known as Nachmanides, or the Ramban, Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman. He was a little bit more of a mystic. He was a mystic, and he was very, very wise. So wise, in fact, that this was a time when Spain was being reconquered by the Catholics. And the Catholics did not think that Judaism was the right religion. And so there were these disputations to try and prove that Judaism was wrong. The first of all of these, the disputations went on for hundreds of years, but the very first one was between a Christian scholar who actually had been born Jewish and converted, and he was now anti-Jewish. His name, blanking on his name, it'll come to me. Almost had it. Wait, I have it. I wrote it down. I have it. On here, the great debate there. Pablo Cristiani. And the king said, okay, you're going to debate the merits of because Christianity, of course, is going to win when you debate Judaism versus Christianity, or Catholicism. But the first rabbi to do this was Nachmanides. And his arguments were so persuasive that he won. This was the only time of all of these disputations when it wasn't really rigged, when it was fair. And Nachmanides gave, and actually I printed this out because I wanted to be able to, so he said, and in his disputations, he was saying that the Christian founder, Jesus, came to the world as the Prince of Peace. But more blood has been spilled by Christians than anyone in the history of humanity. How can that be? And he went on and he gave some other, he said that the Catholicism is supposed to take care of the poor, and yet the poor are exploited, and all of these things. And he won the debate, and he was allowed to live, and he was actually even given some gold coins because he would have been killed otherwise. So the other disputations were rigged, and no one wanted to have to be the one to defend Judaism, but of course they did. But Nachmanides, so you often hear, if you read Torah commentary, you also hear about Maimonides and Nachmanides, or Rambam and Ramban, but they're both very, very interesting things. 1490, jumping up to 1492, and the Jews are expelled from Spain. Jews are given a choice. Their choice is you can convert and stay, or you can leave. So those who stayed, for years they were known as Marranos, which is not a very nice term. It means, but we call them conversos, those who were forced to convert and who practiced their Judaism in secret for hundreds of years. And sometimes the family lost touch that they had been Jewish, but they still kept these secret customs. Really fascinating stories. You even find, like in the southwest of the U.S., those who left Spain and then they went to the New World, and then they made their way up to like New Mexico and some of these traditions. Or you look on stones in a cemetery, and you'll see images of that were Jewish, but the families didn't always know that. And fascinating things. I wish we had more time. I'm gonna really quickly. I'm gonna give you poems, and we're gonna read the one that is Yehuda Halevi's most famous, which is on the back side, not the side that I'm facing it to you, but the other side. It's the one that is called "My Heart Is in the East." It's his most famous poem. So that's the one we'll read, but I'm giving you these, and I'm going to send you a PDF of many more of them. Oh, we must have more. We have more people that I'm going to have you guys share, because I thought that I made enough. All right. So "My Heart Is in the East." Who would like to read it?
In English.
Yeah, in English, of course.
My heart is in the east, but the rest of me far in the west. How can I savor this life, even taste what I eat? How, in the bonds of the Moor, Zion chained to the cross, can I do what I've vowed to and must? Gladly I'll leave all the best of grand Spain for one glimpse of the ruined shrine's dust.
So Yehuda Halevi was born in Spain, and he longed to go and see Jerusalem. So when he was an older man, he left and he went on a journey. He traveled, and some of the poems, if you look through the book when I send it to you, are on this journey that he went by boat, and he went to Egypt, and then he went to Jerusalem, and he died not long after he got to Jerusalem, but he got there. So kind of interesting, but he longed for it. And it's just, some of the poems are like prayers, and some of them are prayers, and some of them are love poems, and some of them are just everyday things. And again, it speaks so beautifully of the world of what it was like in this golden age of Spain when he was free to do that. So I thought that was interesting. So I'm sorry that it's rushed, and I didn't get to everything, but there's no way that you can do history in an hour. But if you ever have any questions, or if you want to know more, I can find something that would help you with that. So, thank you. Yeah. Next week, Cantor, Braun. The week after is me. And then I don't remember. Thank you.